All right, welcome to this explainer. Let's just jump right in, shall we? Today, we're taking a look at something so universally beloved, so deeply ingrained in our global culture, that we honestly rarely stop to think about how it actually got there. We're talking about association football, soccer. But we aren't just here to rehash the rules of the game or talk about the latest championship. No, we are unpacking the completely unexpected and honestly, highly paradoxical history of exactly how the world's most popular sport evolved. So right off the bat, I want to pose a question to you. Who really built global football? Because, as fans, we kind of tend to view the beautiful game as this great unifying force, right? It's like this universal language that brings completely diverse nations together on a level playing field. But when you actually dig into the source material and look closely at the history, a much, much more complex story emerges. It's a story deeply rooted in the expansion of 19th century colonial power, and honestly, it completely reframes how we understand the game today. Section 1. The Muscular Christian Origins. Okay, so the roots of modern football actually trace back to a concept you would probably never associate with a weekend match. It comes from a very specific 19th century Victorian English mindset known as muscular Christianity. And this wasn't just about getting some fresh air and exercise. Not at all. This was a foundational socio-religious movement. It was this intense belief that physical strength and aggressive team sports were absolutely crucial to build disciplined Christian soldiers, to forge moral character, and, well, to essentially cure what some Victorians worried was a decrease in manliness. You really get a feel for this from English author Thomas Hughes. He perfectly captured this vibe in his 1857 novel, writing, "A man's body is given to him to be trained and brought into subjection, and the subduing of the earth." Victorian elites legitimately believed that sports like football were vital tools. They thought that by teaching young men the rules of the pitch, they were directly imparting Western values of self-restraint and honor, basically preparing them to exert control over the sprawling British Empire. So football was, in essence, a literal training ground for imperialism. Moving to Section 2, Exporting the Beautiful Game. Now, this whole ideology of muscular Christianity didn't just stay locked up in English public schools. It physically traveled. It was literally packed in the suitcases of British expats, missionaries, and railway workers. Just picture this rapid sequence of events. In 1877, a 10-year-old boy named Nagendra Prasad casually kicks a ball back to British soldiers at a club ground in India. That single, simple act eventually earns him the title of the father of Indian football. Then, decades later, in the winter of 1894, you have a Scottish dyer named Thomas Donohoe. He's missing his favorite sport, so he has his wife mail him a leather football and boots, and he starts a kickabout at a Brazilian textile factory. Fast forward a few months to April 1895, and Charles Miller, returning from his education in England, organizes the very first formal football match in Sao Paulo. Through these highly individual, almost mundane little moments, the game was exported to what would eventually become massive powerhouse footballing nations. But it wasn't always just casual kickabouts. Oh no. Over in Africa, the spread of the game was highly institutionalized. Colonial mission schools like Adams College in South Africa explicitly used football teams to blend African and Western cultures. They even had a famous squad called the Shooting Stars. The administrators genuinely believed that teaching local boys the strict rules of European football would basically transition them into the world of Christianity, instill colonial discipline, and turn them into advocates for the Western world. Which brings us to Section 3, the pitch of resistance. All right, so here is the absolute ultimate paradox of this whole history. The British intent was crystal clear: imperial discipline and colonial control. But the actual local outcome, completely different. The colonized populations took this imperial tool and just completely flipped the script. They absorbed the game, they domesticated it, and they turned the football stadium into a primary social space for nationalism, political resistance, and actual movements for independence. The very game meant to civilize them became the exact tool they used to rebel. It's fascinating. To really ground this idea of resistance, you have to hear the legendary story of the Immortal 11. In July 1911, the Indian club Mohun Bagan played the British East York Regiment in the IFA Shield final in Calcutta. Picture this. You had 11 entirely barefoot Indian players going right up against the fully equipped, heavily favored military representatives of the British Raj. And the Indian team won, 2-1. This was so much more than just a sports victory. It literally shattered the illusion that the British were invincible. It massively energized the Swadeshi independence movement and gave the local population the spine to really stand up to colonial adversity. And the crazy part is, this wasn't an isolated incident at all. Across the globe, local clubs became deeply, deeply intertwined with political consciousness. Mohammedan sporting success in the 1930s really fueled Muslim nationalism. The East Bengal Club, formed back in 1920, became this absolutely vital platform of identity for displaced refugees. And over in the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region, stadiums actually evolved into these huge transnational beacons for independence movements. They provided a safe space for anti-colonial organization and self-empowerment when almost nowhere else did.
Section 4. Modern imperialism in football.
So fast forwarding to the present day, we need to neutrally examine a pretty powerful argument made in the source material, that modern football economics closely mirror those historical imperialist practices we just talked about. And to really grasp that argument, you just need to consider this one staggering figure: 15,000. Every single year, roughly 15,000 African players move to Europe. Researchers describe them as the new exports of the sporting world, lured away by these massive dreams of becoming global superstars. But we have to impartially report the stark, frankly brutal reality of this migration. Out of those thousands of hopeful kids, literally just 1% actually reach the top leagues. 1%. The vast majority, 99%, are completely discarded by this highly competitive, ruthless football system. They just don't make the cut. And because they were brought over almost exclusively for their athletic potential, they are very often left without legal status, without financial security, or any support network, frequently winding up as undocumented migrants. Now, you might be wondering, well, how does this even happen on such a massive scale? Critics argue it happens through the mechanics of a modern extraction system. First, wealthy European clubs set up these local training academies in Africa. What this does is allow them to bypass FIFA's under-18 transfer rules. Technically, the players are registered locally, but in reality, they are entirely controlled by the European institutions. On top of that, after FIFA actually deregulated player agents back in 2015, the market got flooded with unlicensed middlemen. These completely unregulated agents often deceive families with false promises of trials abroad, take their money and their travel documents, and then just abandon the players the second they reach Europe. Critics point out that this is essentially a system of extreme economic liberalism. It's a hyper-capital-driven market where this free-flowing talent really only benefits the wealthiest European clubs. Meanwhile, weaker economies are turned into passive suppliers of raw talent. Think about it. A player might be acquired incredibly cheaply from an African club, but if he succeeds, his European transfer fees could reach tens of millions of euros down the line. And those are massive profits that the local clubs who originally trained him will literally never see. To really put that into perspective, the financial disparity paints a super clear picture. In 2021, the English Premier League's broadcasting revenue alone hit £5 billion. £5 billion! Compare that to the combined value of all African leagues put together, which was less than £1 billion. So the global football market generates staggering, mind-boggling wealth, but the very regions actually supplying the raw talent remain structurally impoverished and marginalized in this global hierarchy. And that naturally brings us to the severe human rights critiques surrounding the modern game. The human cost of this hyper-commercialization is vast, according to the sources. It ranges from the direct exploitation of youth players via those fraudulent recruitment and human trafficking schemes we mentioned, to the thousands of discarded talents left stranded across Europe. Furthermore, looking at the broader infrastructure required for these massive global spectacles, sources highlight an estimated 6,500 migrant workers died during the preparation for the 2022 Qatar World Cup. Critics present these facts to argue that the modern global game very often prioritizes extreme profit and spectacle over human life and fair governance. Which leaves us with one really profound question to end this explainer. Has football's globalization truly fostered fair competition? Or is it honestly just a new form of sports imperialism? We started out today by learning how Victorian colonizers used the pitch to exert control, and how local populations brilliantly reclaimed it for themselves. But as we follow the billions of dollars flowing today and look at the direction that money travels, it really challenges us to rethink the hidden power dynamics of the beautiful game. The game itself may be universal, but the playing field is far from level. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.